Dr. Dan's Freedom Forum is on the air.
This is Dr. Dan, Freedom Forum Live, streamed every Tuesday evening on YouTube, Facebook, X, and Rumble at 8 p.m. Eastern. Tonight, I don't know about y'all, but do as I say, not as I do, really pisses me off. Since the very first humanoid creature walked the earth, however, almost all human beings have been, are, or will be victims of arrogant, elite, untouchable tyrants who exempt themselves from the rules and regulations they force on us. And it is a perpetual repeating cycle of history from which no escape is apparently possible. It's as if we are all actors in the movie Groundhog Day or some Greek tragedy without the deus ex machina to rescue us before the inevitable devastation occurs. For the past 100 years, the American progressive movement has been slowly destroying America from the inside. In great part, it was created and financed by the wealthy robber barons and industry magnates of the Northeast using noblesse oblige as a pretext. They were joined by philosophers, professors, and other useful idiots who were enamored with the Russian revolutionary promise of a utopian society that soon turned to a totalitarian dictatorship. Communist sympathizers and spies like Alger Hiss, who rose to positions of power and influence in our federal government, created the United Nations with its goal of world governance. Add 2 generations of young Americans educated by hippies from the 60s, a media controlled by the progressive left, and a government by a uniparty of corrupt officials, and our nation is rapidly traveling down the road to self-destruction. At the 1992 climate conference in Rio, the United Nations revealed the creation of Agenda 21, a program that promotes one world governance by the UN, international redistribution of wealth, theft of private property, disarmament of individuals, depopulation of Earth, and a Declaration of Human Rights that directly contradicts and replaces the U.S. Constitution, which of course protects and secures our natural law rights. All dictatorships require a scapegoat. The UN gave us global cooling, then global warming, and then, when Mother Nature didn't cooperate, just plain old climate change. Against all scientific facts and proven truth, carbon dioxide was declared a poison gas and blamed for climate change. While the global elite continued their extravagant jet-set lifestyles, we were all expected to accept a Stone Age lifestyle to reduce our carbon footprint, not theirs. The global elite expected climate change to cause a global depopulation, widespread poverty, malnutrition and disease, and widespread rioting, all as an excuse to allow the United Nations to take control of the world. With their wealth, of course, the ruling class would not be affected by the suffering and tribulations of little people like you and me. They believe their wealth and positions of authority would exempt and protect themselves from the consequences of their actions. Considering the events of modern history, do as I say, not as I do, is not the foundation of a peaceful and just society. The carbon molecule is the basis for all life, food, and energy on Earth, and not the cause of climate change. The hoax is blaming human activity for a natural event that has been going on for 2 billion years. Would it not be much smarter for humanity to adapt to a changing climate rather than trying to stop what is inevitable. Fortunately, many nations are now waking up to the UN sham. Implementation of climate change energy restrictions can only lead to economic failure, riots, and societal collapse. Monotone is a senior policy analyst with the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, which, where he concentrates on energy, natural resources, and international relations. He also serves as a senior policy advisor with the Heartland Institute, senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research, and as adjunct scholar at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Articles by Dr. Cohn have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Investors Business Daily, New York Post, Washington Times, National Review, Philadelphia Inquirer, Detroit News, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Miami Herald, and dozens of other newspapers in the U.S. and Canada. He has been interviewed on Fox News, CNN, Fox Business Channel, BBC, NBC, NPR, and the German language news channel N24 and the Voice of Russia. Dr. Cohen, it is a pleasure to have you on with us. And Kevin Mooney is a journalist, author, and investigative reporter for the Commonwealth Foundation in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. Currently, he is writing insightful articles for Restoration News. He is also the author of a new book, Climate Porn, How and Why Anti-Population Zealots Fabricate Science While Targeting American Capitalism, Freedom, and Independence. Kevin and I are working on some issues together. And so, here we are, the three of us, and it is indeed a pleasure for us all to be together today. So, thank you for being a guest on Freedom Forum Live, Kevin and Bonner.
Great to be here.
Yes, Dr. Dan, it certainly is great to be here.
Well, Bonner, I think we ought to start with the article that you just wrote several weeks ago called Energy Transition Hits a Dead End. What do you say? Isn't that a great place to start?
Oh, indeed it is. This is a development that many of us have been hoping for a long time. And we had also predicted, because we could see how self-destructive the agenda being foisted on the world by elites, how self-destructive that was going to be. And it is with great pleasure that we can now confirm that the great transition to green energy, and let's be clear about what kind of transition this was. This was not an organic transition, such as when we went from our mode of transportation primarily being the horse to something known then as the horseless carriage, and all the things that came with that. No, this was a transition that was being imposed on us by global elites with the associated with the United Nations, associated with the World Economic Forum, but also containing an awful lot of representatives of governments around the world, industry, which hoped to make a lot of money on sources of energy and other so-called green materials, which we were told would enable us to combat climate change, which, as you correctly pointed out in your introduction, is a complete hoax. Let's be careful about what we mean by that. The term climate change is redundant because climates always change. They have been changing ever since the world has been around, and the Earth's been around for about 4.5 billion years. There have been times when the world was much warmer than it is today, and there were times when the entire world was, well, what they call snowball Earth. That is, it was covered from snow from pole to pole. We have the great good fortune, actually, of living in an interglacial period, which means we're living between the last ice age and the next one. So there is a climate change that we should all fear. That is the coming of the next ice age, and come it will with something approaching mathematical certainty. In the meantime, however, we will have to deal with whatever Mother Nature serves up, and that includes the occasional droughts and floods and warming, hot summers, cold winters, and what have you. But those are the kinds of things Mother Nature has always served up. The thing that's imperative for us to do is to adapt, to use our creativity, to use our knowledge of science, and to not allow ourselves to be taken down the primrose path that global elites have put out before us, that would ultimately, uh, lead to poverty on a massive scale throughout the world. And nobody should have any illusions about these things. Can famine, for instance, be created by quote unquote human ingenuity? Well, of course it can. See the People's Republic of China in the early 1950s through the Great Leap Forward. See Stalin's collectivization of land and farms in Ukraine in the early 1930s. So human beings are capable of both great things and they're capable of horrendous things. And as you pointed out in your introduction here, to stampede into doing people into doing things which are manifestly contrary to their own interest, you, among other things, need a villain. And the preposterous villain that they conjured up here was carbon dioxide, nameless atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide. Again, a bit of context. During the age of the dinosaurs, atmospheric levels of CO2 were about 20 times higher than they are today. Was there a runaway greenhouse effect? Answer, no, there was not. We emerged about 250 years ago from something called the Little Ice Age. It ran from about 1300 to 1800, 1850. There were times during the Little Ice Age when atmospheric levels of CO2 were only about 250 parts per million, as compared with about 420 parts per million today. You cannot feed 8 billion people who live on the earth today with low atmospheric levels of CO2. And policies directed toward lowering the atmospheric levels of CO2 are going to have one result. That is starvation, famine. So let's be perfectly clear what this whole agenda had as goal and how completely dishonest it was. Fortunately, however, we are now in the early stages of waking up and walking away from this. The United States is taking the lead in this, no surprise there, by getting out of one UN agreement, one UN program after another, doing away with quote unquote climate related mandates that we imposed on ourselves. And as a result of all of that, there will be no transition to green energy, certainly not in the United States. And again, green energy understood as wind turbines and solar panels, batteries, and what have you. But the chief beneficiary of which, by the way, geopolitically, was none other than the People's Republic of China, which is responsible for the overwhelming amount of resources that go into wind turbines, solar panels, and batteries, the raw materials. The Chinese, thinking long term, saw what the West was doing to itself and said, aha, we can play this game. We'll sell them the very kinds of energy that we know will never work for them, but will work for us. So the Chinese were the great beneficiaries of the great green energy transition. And you can read articles today in sophisticated publications like the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere will say the United States is falling behind on green energy. Well, that's absolutely true, and that is something we should all welcome. Why? Because green energy is mercifully not the future.
You know, one of the things of this entire episode in our history that really concerns me the most is that science has been bought and purchased by the government. And there was a time, of course, when science was more pure. You had the scientific method where you actually had to do experiments. Not only that, you had to blindly accept the results and lead to conclusions based upon the true facts of the experiments you've done. Under this entire charade that has gone on for the last 35 years or so is based on a house of cards of total scientific lies. This is a carbon planet. Everything on this planet is based on carbon. Our lives, our food, our energy, our molecules, our DNA, everything is carbon. To have scientists come out and be saying we're proving that that's not the case, or the very fact, as you pointed out, Bonner, if you don't have high enough CO2 in the atmosphere, you don't have plants. Now, that means somewhere along the way, someone flunked third grade science, where we know that we put out the CO2, the plants take it in and put out oxygen, and there's that symbiotic relationship that feeds everybody. So science has been bought and paid for, and that is a travesty. It will hamper us in the future, because where are the true scientists going to have their funding from?
Dr. Dan, you certainly know this, and I hope our viewers and listeners do too, that we were warned about this. We were warned about this in late 1959, early 1960, by none other than President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who in his farewell address, among other things, warned of the consequences of having government take the lead role in science, because sooner or later, science would become a creature of government. It would become a creature of bureaucratic fiat. Government would pass out money. The government always has an agenda, and those on the receiving end of that money knew full well what was expected of them and acted accordingly. This is why climate alarmists were able to say year after year there is a great consensus about man-made emissions of greenhouse gases leading to climate change, because look at all these studies, A, B, C, D, E, and F, and so on. Well, who funded those studies? In large part, it was government. And the government, which knew, government agencies, grant officers, and what have you, who knew who was reliable, the scientists they chose to come up with the findings, the predetermined findings, knew exactly what was expected of them, and as I said, acted accordingly. One of the many good things that the Trump administration is doing is getting these climate funds and zeroing them out. In so doing, they're not fighting science, they're saving science. They're saving science from the corruption that has inflicted science. And by the way, it's not restricted to climate change. Think about COVID-19. and the catastrophic failure of public health agencies in the United States during the pandemic. So it's something that can happen across the board. Scientific research is important. Scientific findings are absolutely essential, because what we know today is going to be overtaken by what we find out tomorrow. Science is important. It should not be hijacked, and it should not be perverted to serve the very narrow interest of elites who have taken it upon themselves to determine what's in our interest. Well, but or at least that's what they tell us. In fact, they've taken this on themselves to determine what's in their interest.
That's one of the problems, of course, that's going on. Kevin, why don't you join in? What is your take on all this?
Well, I think the great turning point here came back in 2009, I think it was, when we had the ClimateGate scandal. As you recall, these emails were leaked showing that the so-called scientists, really academics, were political figures, not really scientists, had their endings already written and were looking to coerce the outcomes. That's not the scientific method. The scientific method, as you pointed out, Dr. Dan, is to have a theory, test the theory, let it rise and fall on its own merits. But these political activists had their ending already written. I don't think the ClimateGate scandal ever ended. It opened up some doors. I think the great news in the past few years is that honest, independent scientists are finally finding expression. I'll name a few of them. The CO2 Coalition, a great coalition bringing in dozens of scientists and researchers from across the globe to tout the benefits of CO2, to highlight the natural influences on climate, and to give expression to folks who have been muzzled for decades. Another group worth mentioning, I think, is Professor Willie Soon's group, the Ceres Group, which is another independent group that takes a hard look at some of the astronomical solar influences on climate. So I do think finally the right science is finding expression. Climate realism, which has been marginalized in science, I think some even deplatformed, losing their careers because they were willing to speak out. But I think the big, really underreported news is honest science finding expression, and for the reasons that you touched on, that it's finally beyond the control of government influences. They're independently funded, they're pursuing the scientific method, and they're debunking this alarmist agenda that has done so much damage to poorer populations who are very vulnerable to these severe policies.
So, Bonner, what do you think the current status is of this whole movement? What is going on with some of the actors who have been leading us all astray?
I think they are absolutely stunned by how quickly their whole agenda, one which had been built up, if you just talk about the climate change agenda, you can roughly date it to 1988 with a speech that Al Gore gave back when he was a senator representing Tennessee, or pretending to represent Tennessee. He actually represented himself. But I think they are astounded by how quickly it is unraveling. The United States, as I pointed out earlier, has withdrawn from so many climate change related programs, agreements, and what have you, and we have defunded in an absolutely astounding manner so many giveaways, handouts that the government had set up over decades that kept the whole beat of climate change going. And frankly, they're reeling from this. Believe me, they're not going to give up and go gently into that quiet night. That's not what these people do. They're hoping that they can make a comeback. However, I don't really think that they're going to be able to restore the world that they once thought they had right in their hands. A couple of reasons for that. Number one is, at least in the United States, the legal landscape has changed radically thanks to certain Supreme Court decisions that have reined in the regulatory state. That is, a world in which unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats essentially became people who wrote laws. Every law that's passed in the United States in the Congress through the legislative branch has ambiguities in it. It has sets out goals, and then it's up to bureaucrats to fill in the rules and regulations that make that possible. Well, over time, uh, we saw a situation in which unelected bureaucrats became de facto lawmakers. Why? Because every rule and regulation imposed by the federal government has the force of law behind it. And when you have a situation that allows bureaucrats to make up rules and regulations almost out of whole cloth, you have something that is completely out of control. Well, a couple of Supreme Court decisions, West Virginia v. EPA, and others have rolled that back. They simply can't do that anymore. There's something called the major questions doctrine. And if a rule and regulation to fight climate change or whatever the agenda may be, it is not specifically authorized by Congress. There isn't a bureaucracy anywhere in the United States now that can impose that. Similarly, the doctrine of Chevron deference was rolled back, which allowed, again, unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats to interpret ambiguous language in certain statutes the way they saw fit. So in that way, they became de facto lawmakers. Well, that's been rolled back. So even if you had an administration in power in Washington, D.C., and that will happen, sadly, sometime down the road, they're going to find out rather quickly that they can't go back to the golden age of the regulatory state, simply because there are Supreme Court decisions that will not allow them to do that. Then there is the little business of the public never really bought into this agenda to begin with. People don't like paying more for gas. They don't like paying more for electricity to heat their homes in winter and cool them in summer. And they don't like being forced, as the previous administration tried to do, to purchase electric vehicles, which they were going to do by simply regulating gasoline-powered vehicles out of the marketplace. That was their goal. They were well on their way to doing that, or so they thought. And until they lost a certain election, the Trump administration came in and, to its great credit, rolled all of that back, not just through executive orders and changes in policies, but also through legislation, which can only be done by other legislation. So this is a different world now. And getting back to your question, what are they going to do? Well, I said they're not going to walk away from it, but I think they're going to have to focus on something else. And by the way, while I'm at it, very quickly, the whole artificial intelligence era that we have entered, going back 2 or 3 years, but it's very intensive now. AI and the tremendous demands it makes on electricity turns out to be the black swan for green energy. Why? Because you will never produce the amount of electricity needed, not just to run the economy as a whole, but to run the data centers essential for artificial intelligence, AI. You'll never do that with wind turbines and solar panels. No, you're going to need something that's available to artificial intelligence 24/7, 365. Even the Silicon Valley people who were so proud to thump their chest and say how they were committed to saving the planet by embracing green energy, believe me, they don't let green energy anywhere near their data centers that they're putting up around the country. By the way, we have 7,000 of them and counting. What they want is energy that's available 24/7, 365. They get that from natural gas. They get that from nuclear power. They get that from coal. That's the energy of the future until we get into such things as fusion, and other things that we today can't even begin to imagine. So you're seeing among these people a gradual recognition that all the pontificating they have engaged in over the years and all the enormous sums of money they've spent have actually come to nothing. Ford and General Motors, just to cite two examples, have radically done away with their production of electric vehicles. Why? Because there's no market worthy of the name for electric vehicles, and there is no infrastructure that's anywhere near being able to accommodate them, particularly when the electricity that would accommodate them is also being demanded by artificial intelligence. So their timing here couldn't have been worse. So the collapse of the EV market in the United States is something we can welcome. And again, this was a kind of industrial policy. This was one of the things they were going to impose on us. But the unwashed didn't go along with this. They didn't buy the cars that people thought they would buy and hoped they would buy. And even Detroit, which had at one time had embraced this agenda itself, has walked away from it.
So here's the deal. I mean, what you've brought up, one of my very pet peeves, and that is the very first sentence of the Constitution of the United States, Article 1, is all legislative powers rest with the Congress of the United States. It's one of my favorite sentences.
Yeah.
And that's what the bureaucracy, that's what the bureaucracy tries to do away with. So that's one of the things that you're fighting. And I was going to ask Kevin, have you ever tried to fight the bureaucracy, Kevin?
Yeah. Well, let's just go through my different FOIA requests, which take forever to get answered, among other things. But I will say, to Bonner's point, I do think the unelected extra constitutional administrative state is now under assault in a way it hasn't been in a long time, thanks to the Supreme Court decisions and thanks to the Trump administration. One other point I'll add, just to build on what Bonner had to say, one reason why I don't think, if God forbid it's a President Gavin Newsom, one reason why he won't be able to just go back and rebuild this climate industrial complex is because of what Trump just did in the past couple of days, getting it out of that UN climate framework. Remember, President Trump did withdraw from the Paris Treaty, and I do call it a treaty. He did it in his first term, but Team Biden simply reinserted us back in because we were still part of that framework. That's no longer an option. The importance of that decision is very difficult to overstate. So I don't think we're just looking at a speed bump. I think we're looking at some enduring policy changes.
And that is true. They are not going away, Bonner, and you amply said that. It's very important for people to realize people like this do not go away. And you look at the history of the progressive movement. They've had their ups and downs, but they still hang out, constantly trying to peck away at our freedoms. So what do you say to people? How do you prevent the lingering zealots from corrupting the process that we've now embarked on?
Well, as I said, the zealots are not going to go anywhere. They are going to continue to impose their peculiar view of the world on us, or try to do so. Now, we do have some experience with these people. The climate agenda, which is unraveling even as we speak, and the catastrophic handling of the COVID-19 pandemic by the progressives, who actually in many respects welcomed it because it gave them another opportunity to tell us what to do. And truth be told, they weren't all that upset by the number of people who died from that, because that's also part of their agenda. They want fewer people in the world. And if that takes a pandemic to do that, then so be it. But the two very bad experiences we have had, I think, will resonate with ordinary citizens who are trying to put food on the table, get the kids off to school, and do the kinds of things that ordinary people do. Uh, they have seen where this agenda leads. And I think they're going to be extremely reluctant to fall for fashion, whatever that the next fashion will be. And believe me, there will be one. Uh, the the mainstream media, which is, by the way, losing influence very rapidly, it will grasp onto it. The professors, the elites in the country, they will fall for this. But their ability to impose their will on the unwashed masses, on the rubes out in the suburbs and the hicks out in the boondocks, and believe me, they view these people in just those contemptible terms. Their ability to herd them in the direction in which they want to take them, I think, has been greatly reduced. Again, they won't go away, but we can draw on our experience and we can say, oh, wait a minute, we followed your directions during the pandemic, or we tried to transition to green energy and it blew up in their faces. If you got that wrong, you're going to get this wrong too. So what they have is they have a track record of catastrophic failure. And that's something that we should rub in their faces with every opportunity that we get.
The thing is, in addition to all this now, I'm looking at what's gone on in the last several decades. There's been a lot of harm to people in this country. I'm not just talking about the COVID pandemic, which of course was man-made and man-amplified, and we were prevented from doing what we should have been doing as physicians to cure people. Really, sometimes at cost to our jobs and things like that. But I'm talking, if you look at a lot of the people whose property has been taken as part of this agenda, and all of that, that's a lot of it gone out west. How do we start making all of that right? That's a grievance that really should be addressed. So I'd ask both of you, remember, looking at all that's gone on as part of this green agenda, with property and rights being taken for farmers and people who work the land and the like. How do we get that back? How do we create that back for them?
Yeah, Bonner and I have had some experience battling some of these things. Let me just go take one example, this great case of conservation easements, which began really as a laudable effort to give people tax breaks in exchange for conservation. But of course, the land trust got involved and it morphed into a government takeover of private property. One great thing that I think has happened is the great exposure of this incestuous relationship between green activists and government at all different levels. It's a very difficult thing to unwind. But to answer your question, I think it's a combination of grassroots activism, having our own alternative media platforms. Unfortunately, the money in the organization is still on the other side of the table. But you do have those rare examples where you have folks with some of their own deep pockets, their willingness to get down in the mud and fight, who can go to toe with some of these green groups. And there's been a few examples where that has happened. The Chiltons out west is an excellent example of that. There's also examples of that in Virginia. But unfortunately, I still think we have a lot of what I call greenism burrowed into all levels of government that's very difficult to unwind. So I think it remains an ongoing battle.
No, not only greenism in the government, but I'm talking about people who lost land, lost grazing rights, lost the ability to access their land. How do we deal with that, Bonner?
One of the things we can do is, particularly west of the Mississippi River, where the federal government owns so much land. It's astronomical. Something like 87% of the land in Nevada is controlled by the federal government. In Utah, it's around 63-64%. Idaho, 63-64%. Now, Mayor Mandami in New York City thinks that the government is the institution that should run grocery stores. Well, we all know where that's going to lead. Well, what makes you think that the government running, owning, and managing, quote unquote, managing land is going to do any better? Uh, I would like to see a lot of that land in the West sold off for housing, sold off for energy and mineral development. It has absolutely no business whatsoever being controlled by the federal government. I'm not talking about the national parks that or wilderness areas, but the land, and there are tens of millions of acres of this mismanaged by the Bureau of Land Management. That's one place where we can start. Another thing that people should do is that a lot of these decisions don't really necessarily come from Washington or from the UN or anything like that. They're right in your own hometown, in your own county. Look, uh, meetings are won by people who show up. And if there is a decision about what to do with natural resources, be it land, a zoning decision, or something like that, in your county, in your municipality, or wherever you live, and you feel strongly about it, believe me, go there and raise a stink. Uh, uh, it has to be, there's an expression that the left uses, think globally and act locally. Well, they're onto something there. But we have to do the same thing. If you want to roll these people back, put them in their place, and keep them from transforming your community into something that serves their interest as opposed to yours. A lot of times you have to fight them right on the local level, put enormous pressure on local politicians who will ultimately bend to your will, believe me, because that's what these people that's what these people do because they want to be reelected. So be aware of what is going on in your local community. Watch your neighbors very carefully because many of them do not wish you well. And they want to do things to your community that, believe me, you don't want to see, whether it's zoning for housing, zoning for land use, or what have you. Be active, get engaged, fight these people at the local level. And at the same time, welcome decisions that have been handed down by the courts. Another one that was handed down 2 or 3 years ago uh, will protect farmers and ranchers all across the country who happen to have a small body of water on their land, uh, a ditch, a pond, or what have you, that has no connection whatsoever to navigable water of the United States. And get and as a result of a Supreme Court decision, Sackett v. EPA, that was handed down in 2023, the ability of the Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to restrict to impose restrictions on farmers and ranchers on how they can use their land. That has been greatly reduced. That is something that is to be welcomed. And those are the kinds of things that are going on now, which have actually strengthened the hands of people who, for decades, were at the not so tender mercy of federal bureaucrats in league with environmental groups who were absolutely determined, if they couldn't own the land outright, as one EPA official famously said, we don't have to own it as long as we can control it. And that wasn't just idle bluster. That was, in fact, the case for a long, long time. So there are developments that are going on which are extremely positive, and we need to build on that so that farmers and ranchers and other people who live in rural America are not spending their hard-earned money on lawyers and consultants uh, who protect them from the greed of the elites who want to tell them how to run their lives and how to manage their property.
Well, you know, that's the founders of this country had that exact method in mind because they believed that the federal government had so little to do that they would only be in Washington a few months.
Yeah.
They'd come back and live among their neighbors and have to explain exactly why they did certain things. But they wanted decisions to be made locally. And I agree with you 100% that your county commissions, your town councils are where these decisions are really can be enforced. But don't forget, the people on the other side know that, and they're banging at the door just like you are. So if you believe in limited government, property rights, free market economy, individual freedom, natural law rights, and that kind of thing, you need to be very, very active because the other side is very active as well. What do you think, Kevin?
I think there's some encouraging signs at the local level. I'll mention one. What is it? In federalism, we say the states are the great laboratories of democracy. Well, in New England, of all places, there is a movement afoot, some serious proposals to just get out of these green boondoggles, because, of course, they put all their faith in the offshore wind, which is already collapsing. And there are some serious proposals on the table to switch over to nuclear energy and natural gas as a way. Number one, it's one way to meet the growing demands of what Bonner alluded to, the growing demands of AI and other areas that simply can't be met through green energy. And number two, if they're so concerned about emissions, they should applaud nuclear power and they should applaud natural gas. Now, my suspicion is that's not really what they care about. But the point is that even by their own metrics, there's environmental benefits to moving over to natural gas and to nuclear power. It wouldn't be something if those New England states became sort of the model for the rest of the country. And Gavin Newsom, go call your office because some of these blue states are moving in a different direction.
What do you think? What do you think, Bonner?
I think there are some positive developments there. Kevin is absolutely right about that. The pace is not fast; it's a snail's pace. But New England has put itself in a position where it desperately needs electricity. It doesn't produce itself. It's going. And if they are to meet the needs of their population and do away or try to turn things around so that they don't continue to lose population to red states like Tennessee, like Florida, like Texas, even places that nobody thought would ever amount to anything, like Oklahoma and West Virginia now, both of which, by the way, are going to be fat city in a few years, simply because of intelligent policies such as low taxes and abundant and affordable energy. Well, if New England walls itself off from all that, New England is going to go the way of Haiti. And that's not where New England wants to be. So, yes, there is a gradual, grudging realization on their part that if they don't change their way, they're going to become irrelevant. Let's not forget, getting back to our friend about carbon dioxide, decarbonization equals deindustrialization. That's just a fact of life. Now, you will probably never get people in New England to say that, but judge them not so much by their words, but by their deeds. And if, in fact, they are taking a second serious look at nuclear power and a second serious look of allowing natural gas pipelines to go from Pennsylvania, where there's tons of natural gas, northeast through New York State into New England, as opposed to actually importing LNG from, of all places, Russia, which they were doing up until very recently, then you're seeing some real progress. And once again, confirmation that we are, in fact, gradually moving away from green energy, because even blue states are starting to do that.
Well, Kevin, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that you have a book coming out. Isn't that true?
That's true. It's timed with 250 years of American independence, July 4th, 2026, going back to 1776. Maybe the correct way to look at it is the restoration of American independence. I conclude the book with a proposal for us to get out of the United Nations altogether, but Trump has done the next best thing. The last time I counted, he withdrew from 66 different treaties and conventions and international agreements that were designed to hamstring the United States, and that's a huge step forward. So maybe we don't have to wait until July to start celebrating. The book does go through what you just discussed, Dr. Dan. To me, this movement was all about assaulting the ideals of the American founding, unraveling the American constitutional system, attacking the founding period, neutering the legislative branch so that the unelected administrative state became ascendant. And there's at least some incremental movements back in what I view as the right direction. So, it remains to be seen if we'll have a tricentennial to celebrate. I don't know if we're looking at permanent lasting changes, but it's going to take more than just the second Trump administration. We're going to need a good 12 years to reverse the damage the left has done. But I think at least the specter of American independence is back in play, and hopefully the restoration of property rights as a contradiction to all the awful Agenda 21 items that have been in circulation for so long.
Well, it certainly has been a very interesting discussion. Does anyone want to sum up and say anything final, like Bonner?
I'll say one little thing quickly, and I'm surprised this doesn't get more attention. But America is going back to the moon in just a few weeks, and getting back to the high science of the Apollo era. And it occurs to me that if NASA had put all its faith in modeling as opposed to rigorous scientific observations and exercises, we would have dead astronauts. We would not have successful moon landings. And so I think the fact that we're going back to the moon coinciding with the anniversary of American independence is sort of divine providence at work. And I think there's some cause for hope for real science to find expression.
I have to say, when you talk about modeling, that's the absolute epitome of garbage in, garbage out, wouldn't you say?
Well, again, it goes back, yeah.
So, Bonner, what do you have to say?
To Kevin's point about space travel, let's not forget that NASA essentially made itself almost irrelevant. It became a bureaucracy that might have been inevitable. And the NASA that put Apollo 11 astronauts on the moon in the summer of 1969, that NASA no longer exists, and it's never coming back. I think the real future of space travel in the United States is going to come from the private sector, from SpaceX and SpaceX's competitors. That's where the smart people are. That's where you can think outside the box. That's where you don't have to adhere to government guidelines that are the kinds of things that you find throughout bureaucracies. No, do away with that. Make use of the creative minds who are capable of, as I said, thinking outside the box. So yes, we are going back to the moon. We're going to go to Mars. We're going to a whole bunch of other places. And you know what's going to get us there? First and foremost, the private sector, because that's where the brains are.
Well, that's really what we all should hope for, because the free market economy has been responsible for the greatest achievements of mankind for hundreds of years. Free market economy is what gets it done, not the government. We have come a long way from that hope, that action, because government wants to get bigger. No matter what we say, no matter what we want, if you're in the government, you want more and more power. That is really what we have to cut back on. We have to put that genie back in the box, because that's where the problem comes from. Big government getting paid off by people who have special interests. Will be the downfall. It's this whole thing, this whole climate change is a house of cards that has built on lies. And that is why it is coming down. So I want to thank you all, Bonner Cohn and Kevin Mooney, for being a guest on Freedom Forum Live. This has been a great discussion.
Of course.
Yeah, enjoyed taking part in it.
Thank you so very much. Good evening, all of you.
Good evening.
Good evening.